Hello everyone and welcome to the tutorial. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to make the simple gameplay of Rolling Sky. Now if you don't know Rolling Sky you can just look it up, but you may have already heard of it if you're looking at this tutorial, but it's simply a game where a ball rolls around from side to side and it bounces on springs and avoids objects. I'm just going to be making the movement and the bouncing on a spring in this tutorial. Now the first thing we need to do of course is create a new empty project. This is what this is. This is default. No settings have been changed. I'm going to add a new object, and we're going to start with a 3D box. Now, of course, you could make this a 3D model that's actually a circle, but in this case, we're just going to use a box because it's going to work the same. Now, I'm going to make the object name player, and of course, I'm going to set the faces. I'm going to choose a file. Well, not choose a file. I'm going to create with Piskel, and I'm just going to use this pinkish right here, use the paint bucket tool, and paint the entire thing this magenta / pinkish color right here. I'm going to make sure all the faces are selected. I'm going to just choose this file for all the faces for our player object. Now, once this is done, we're going to go into behaviors, and we want this to be a physics object because this object is going to have to move. It's going to have to move around, so we're going to add a behavior. I'm going to type in 3D physics. 3D physics. And when you type in 3D physics, I was completely spelling that wrong. But 3D physics, when it pops up, you should see 3D physics engine. And when you click 3D Physics Engine, you'll have these settings. Now, one thing we want to do is we're going to have this as fixed rotation so it doesn't rotate all out of whack. We're going to keep it dynamic, which means that it actually moves like a regular object in the real world. It's not static. And we're going to keep everything else the same. And one last behavior we want to add is a third-person camera so that the camera actually looks at the player. We don't have to do any complicated setup. All we have to do is add a new behavior, and we can type in third person camera, and you'll see that it will follow an object at distance. And one thing we want to not check is automatically rotate the camera with the object. We want the rotation of the camera to be pretty much static. So we're going to hit apply and then drag the player onto the scene. Now if we preview, we're going to instantly have a problem. And that problem is that the player actually falls. And that's why we need a ground that the player can stand on. So we're going to add another object, and we're going to have this also as a 3D box. I'm going to name this ground. And we're going to make sure all the faces can be seen. And we're going to just create a file with Piskel. I'm going to make this ground, I'm going to make it green so we can kind of tell it apart from the background of the player. I'm going to save it, and we're going to fill it in with all the faces right here. And one last thing we want to do is we're going to add another behavior to the ground as well. And we're going to add a 3D physics behavior. So I'm going to type in 3D. And let's see if we scroll down till we see 3D physics engine. And now we're going to make this static. And since this is a type static 3D object, that means the object won't ever move. Even if we try to move it with events, it still won't move. So we're going to keep everything else the same. We don't really need to set anything else up. I'm going to drag the ground onto the scene. And one thing you'll see is that the ground is going over the player. And the way that we fix this is by changing the Z position, which controls the height in 3D in GDevelop. So I'm going to click the player first, and then click into the Z and set it to like 200. And then I'm going to stretch out all of the ground so we're actually sitting on something. So now that we actually have ground under us, let's preview it. And now when we see it run, you'll see that we're standing on the ground and we can see our player from a third person point of view. Now I'm going to stretch out the ground to be really far because we're going to be moving. So now that we're going to be making the movement next, we have to think about how does Rolling Sky's movement works. Well, in the game Rolling Sky, it's kind of a 3D runner. That's the genre it would be counted as. And since it's counted as that genre, when it comes to a 3D runner, you automatically move without needing to press anything. So we're going to do that as well. We want the player to always be moving forward by default. So the first thing we're going to do is add a new condition, but actually we don't have to add a condition in this part. We just can leave it blank since we want it to always happen. And now we're going to add an action, and we're going to click into player. I'm going to go into linear velocity, and we want to change the linear velocity of the X. And I'm going to set this as equal to 900. And the reason that we're changing the linear velocity of the X position is because, look, in our point of view. In our point of view, the player is moving in this direction where my mouse is moving. So look, if I change the X position of the player, if I click into the player and then change the X position, you'll see that if the X position goes up, the player starts moving to the right. But in our case, it will move forward if you can kind of understand the point of view. And it'll make more sense now. you'll see that we can see our player moving forward constantly, and it will move forward all the way until it falls off of the ground. So that's the forward movement, and now we need the sideways movement. And the sideways movement is very simple. When you press right or left, assuming you're on a computer, actually it's a mobile game, so you swipe. But when you press right or left, you would simply just move to the left or you'll slide to the right. So I'm going to add a new event. We're going to add a condition, and we're going to make the left movement first. So keyboard, going to key press, and then type in left. So if the left key is pressed, and that's just the left arrow key, we're going to add an action, click into our player, type in linear velocity, go into linear velocity y, and set it equal to -500. If I hit OK, if I press left, you'll see that it keeps moving to the left, but it will keep doing that even when we're not pressing left. But we're going to fix that later. We're going to copy and paste this condition, and we want to do a similar thing, but just for the right. So as you can predict, instead of checking if the left key is pressed, we're going to check if the right key is pressed. And instead of setting the linear velocity to -500, we'll set it equal to the opposite, which is 500. So we're going to preview this. And now that we've previewed this, if I press left, I go to the left, and if I press right, I go to the right. But the problem is that it keeps sliding around indefinitely, even when we're not pressing any buttons. So now we want to make a check that if the left key and the right key are both not being pressed, then we want to set the linear velocity of y to be equal to 0. So I'm going to add another event and add a condition, and we want to check if the left key and the right key are not being pressed. So I'm going to type in, we'll click into the keyboard, key press, type in left, and we want to invert the condition because we want to check if the left key is not being pressed. And now, since we're checking if the left key is not being pressed, we want to have another condition, which is and. I'm going to go into other conditions. Let's scroll down into events and control flow, click into and now we want to check if the right key is also not being pressed. So let's add a sub condition, go into other conditions, keyboard, key pressed, right, and now we're going to also invert the condition, so we're checking that the right key is not pressed. So basically what this says is that if the left key is not being pressed and if the right key is not being pressed, then we want to do something. And that something that we want to do is change the linear velocity of the player on the y-axis to be 0. So we're going to copy and paste this action here. Going to right click, copy, scroll over the action and paste it. And now I'm going to set the linear velocity of y to be equal to 0. So I'm going to click into preview. And you'll see that normally I'm moving nowhere. I press left, I move, but if I stop pressing left, I'll stop moving. So that's how it works. This is regular movement. This is regular, completely normal movement. And the last thing we're going to do is add the bouncing effect. Because in Rolling Sky, there's a lot of springs in the game where you'll bounce over things. Sometimes it'll kill you if you do it. Sometimes it won't. It depends on the level. But it's a good feature to have to be able to bounce. And this is a good thing to learn as well because we need to learn how to add forces to our 3D objects in different directions. Now before we do that, we're going to add another new object. And we're going to have this object also as a 3D box. And I'm going to call this object spring. I'm going to call it spring. And we're going to activate all of the faces here. And we're going to create the face with Pixel. I'm going to click into yellow, use the paint bucket tool and paint the entire thing. And as you can predict, we're going to fill in all of the faces with our new sprite that we just made. And now that we have this new sprite, we're going to hit apply. And we don't need to add any physics to it because it's a static object. So let's go into let's drag our spring onto the scene. And let's set it as the Z position as being equal to 20 because we want to slightly stick up out of the ground. And let's slide it over here so the player can't really avoid it. And you'll see that it's kind of slightly sticking out of the ground. I'm going to actually set it a little bit lower to 10. And let's preview once again. Didn't mean the rhyme there, but you'll see that slightly sticking out of the ground. Not perfect, but it's good enough since we're just prototyping. Now, what we want to happen is that when our player flies over the spring, what we want to happen is that we will start bouncing up in the air by applying an impulse on the object. But also, we have to detect 3D collision. And 3D collision detection is not exactly built into GDevelop. It's not exactly built into GDevelop. So let's add an extension first. So let's go into our 3 bars on the top left, and let's go into extensions. I'm going to type in 3D collision. And you'll see that this is a community extension made by D8H and Tulin Vaki Productions. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Let's install this in the project. And this just handles 3D collision as you would handle 2D collision. So let's go into our events now, and let's finally make the bouncing of the player. So let's add a new event, and let's add a condition. And our condition that we're going to add is that if the player is in collision, and make sure you don't go into the collision that is marked under this 3D physics, because that's completely different and only works between two 3D physics objects. So we're going to put collision in 3D, and if it's in collision with the spring, that's what we're checking. If player is in collision with spring, then we want to only trigger this once. We don't want to keep bouncing up forever. So we're going to only trigger this once. So I'm going to add a condition under it, go into other conditions, events and control flow, and trigger once while true. And this is the last event that we're going to make in this part. So I'm going to add an action, and we're going to go into our player, and we want to add an impulse at a point. So you see that we have all of these things, forces and impulses. And if you want me to make a full guide on how to use everything in a 3D physics, I can do that. But we're not going to go over all of this right now. So right now we're just going to just go over and apply an impulse at a point. Now you see that we have all these settings right here. It's not complicated. Now for the X component, it's just simply saying, are you trying to apply the impulse on the X-axis, on the Y-axis, or the Z-axis? Now we're trying to make the player go up. And remember, in 3D and GDevelop, going up and down is handled by the Z-axis. So we're going to set the X and Y as being equal to 0. But we do want to apply an impulse at the Z-axis. So we're going to type in, this is a very small amount. So I'm going to type in 10. You could, of course, play with this however you want. And now that we have this, where we want the force to be applied at and how much, we also have the application point. And this will control what point on the object will the force be applied at. Because as you know in real life, if you push an object at a certain point, whether it be the center or the side of it, it interacts differently based on where the force was applied. That's just how physics works in the real world. And the same thing for 3D. Now when it comes to the x-axis, actually it gives us a tip right here. We can apply the force at mass center, at the mass center X, mass center Y, and mass center Z if we don't want the object to rotate at all. And that's exactly what we want here. So we're going to put player dot mass center, and you'll see we have mass center X. And now we're going to put player dot mass center Y as well. And it says player dot mass center Z. So I'm going to try to copy and paste this, but last time I checked, this really doesn't work. As you can see, it gives us the underlying thing. So that's why this is kind of a fake thing. I don't know why it has it up there. But there's another way we can apply it. We can put player dot center, and we have object 3D dot center Z. They actually kind of need to fix that right there because it's not even a real event condition that we can use. But let's click OK. And basically what we're doing is we're applying a little impulse. It's like a little punch to the object on the Z-axis upwards. So we're going to preview this. And now when we go over the spring, you see that we bounce up into the air. And actually that's a lot. That's very dramatic compared to the real rolling sky. So I'm going to hit preview. And we're going to scroll over it. And we have it right there. We just made the game. This is Rolling Skies gameplay. And that is the end of that tutorial. Now, before we end this tutorial, if you of course enjoyed the tutorial, if you gained something from the tutorial, if you found this helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my new videos. But also, as a special message, no matter how crazy the 3D game is, whatever comment gets the most likes of suggesting a 3D game, I will try my absolute best to remake it accurately in GDevelop. Whatever comment gets the most likes, no matter how crazy it is, I'll try my best to make it in GDevelop, assuming it doesn't go past its limitations. But even if it does, I'll try to even figure out something completely new, like I did before at the Minecraft, to make something completely new in GDevelop. But once again, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and comment down below what tutorials you want to see next, whether or not you would like a full 3D physics guide, and anything else you have in the comments, whether it be questions, just anything. But once again, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.